I'm David Walper. In April 1951, the Korean War was at a crucial point. At that moment, the Supreme Commander, Douglas MacArthur, was fired for insubordination by President Truman. Yet upon MacArthur's return to the United States, he was received by the nation as a hero. Our film, The General, is an in-depth portrait of one of this country's most brilliant soldiers. Never shy of personal publicity, cameras were with him as early as World War I, when he led the legendary Rainbow Division in France. His heroic service in the Pacific during World War II was followed by his masterful leadership in rebuilding Japan. Together with his stunning victories in Korea, he had become a revered household name. His removal by Harry Truman barely tarnished his reputation. Contrary to his moving self-appraisal, "Old soldiers just fade away," General Douglas MacArthur lives in this stirring biography of a great patriot. And now narrated by Van Heflin, The General.
Here at West Point's Quad and Plain, he has been drilled in the simple rudiments of the soldier's faith.
The long, gray line has never failed us. Were you to do so, a million ghosts, in olive drab, in brown khaki, in blue and gray, would rise from their white crosses, thundering those magic words: duty, honor, country.
Duty, honor, country. Around these words, MacArthur structured his life. His understanding of them would often bring him into conflict with other Americans. But for MacArthur, these words would be forever clear, simple, and sufficient. As the 83-year-old soldier takes his last salute at the point, he already is a symbol of a departed time. For his career links 2 centuries and has its beginnings in America's romantic age of innocence, the western frontier of the 1880s. Here at Fort Wingate in New Mexico, Geronimo and the Apaches still threaten the harsh, dry land, and in the north, the Sioux is dying hard. Flamboyant veterans of 100 border skirmishes, cavalry troopers patrol the unsettled wastes, often led by Indian scouts from defeated tribes. Life on the frontier is uncertain, but its beliefs are clear and firm. God is in his heaven, and Father is the head of the house. Captain Arthur MacArthur, Civil War hero and now commander of Fort Wingate's garrison, sets a virile example for young Douglas and his older brother Arthur. A dreamy child of 5, Douglas still is kept in curls by his mother. An iron-willed Virginia belle, she is a symbol of Southern gentility in a succession of dusty Army outposts. But it is from his father that he learns a sterner code of obedience and command. At 13, Douglas earns his father's highest compliment. I think I see the makings of a soldier in that boy. But already in his dreams, the boy has fought 100 battles. All around around young MacArthur is the brave panorama of the frontier cavalry, the bivouac campfires, the bugles in the morning, the creak of leather, the long marches in the shimmering heat. This is boots and saddles soldiering. And to young Douglas, it's intoxicating. In 1898, Douglas longs to join his father in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine campaigns. But his father, now a famed general, insists his son proceed to West Point. There'll be plenty of fighting in the coming years, he writes, and of a magnitude far beyond this. Prepare yourself. Alive with a growing sense of national power, Washington is moving toward a larger role on the world stage. Here, soon after West Point, Douglas MacArthur first enters the corridors of power. Through his father's influence and his own brilliance, he rises quickly, becomes an aide to Teddy Roosevelt. But his cockiness makes enemies, as well as friends. Even on field duty, his slapdash mixture of non-military clothing reveals a strongly personal flair. When World War I comes, MacArthur is fit, but America is not. As the nation mobilizes, MacArthur, now a colonel, becomes Chief Staff Officer of the Fighting 42nd Division. With typical dramatic instinct, MacArthur has suggested using National Guard units from across the nation to form the renowned Rainbow Division, which proudly carries America's banners into the war to end all wars. Fired by MacArthur's aggressive spirit, the division achieves an unparalleled combat record in France. Not only men die here, a world dies with them. An age of innocence is ended. But amid the mire remains one figure of romantic chivalry. MacArthur leads his men into battle armed only with a swagger stick, insists it is good for morale when an officer dies at the head of his troops. For his courage under fire, he's decorated with almost monotonous regularity. For his superb leadership, he becomes a brigadier general at 38. A legend is forming. Here is the soldier of the recruiting posters, supremely brave, gifted, and handsome. The doughboy and civilian, he is the image of the gallant warrior hero. Among his multitude of admirers, none is more certain of his exalted destiny than the young general himself.
Take seat!
At the United States Military Academy at West Point, the Army creates a special breed of men, the military elite. Within a nation founded on individual liberty, they live in a narrower world of taut restraint. The most ordinary functions of their lives are here rigidly controlled. In such a world, Douglas MacArthur lived his entire life. He first enters the point on June 13th, 1899, with the highest score on entrance exams. For MacArthur and his classmates, the first year is a trial by fire, but he welcomes the ordeal. As he begins to learn to use the tools of war, he models his career after the great generals of history. A paragon as a student, he leads his class in academic studies and wins his letter in athletics. He will graduate with the highest scholastic average in a century. His classmates are awed. One says he's brave as a lion and smart as hell. Singled out because of his father's fame, MacArthur is a choice target for the brutal hazing then permitted at the point. He's forced to do knee bends until he collapses in convulsions. Later, a congressional investigating committee insists that he expose his tormentors. Refusal to comply can lead to his dismissal and the end of his Army career. But his mother has always urged him, never lie, never tattle. Living near him at the point, she sends him a poem. Be this then your task, if task it shall be, to force this proud world to do homage to me. Be sure it will say when its verdict you've won, she reaps as she sowed. This man is her son. MacArthur refuses to answer. Instead of bringing dismissal, his stand is honored by the committee and his classmates. Only 16 years later, in 1919, as a general and war hero, MacArthur takes command of the point. Still unmarried, he asks his mother to keep house for him at the superintendent's cottage. MacArthur returns to find the academy in jeopardy. After the armistice, there's a strong national reaction against war and all its symbols. While warding off congressional efforts to abolish West Point, he sets to modernizing its most outdated attitudes and traditions. Although he does not abolish hazing, he radically curbs it. He increases the emphasis on science and the emerging political conflicts of the modern world. He removes the monastic isolation imposed on the cadets, encourages greater contact with the world around them. And in his most noted reform, MacArthur makes major sports a requirement for all cadets. At 42, the exact midpoint of his life, MacArthur's ready to leave West Point. An extraordinary career is behind him, and he is still unmarried. In 1922, he meets party-loving Louise Brooks, socialite, heiress, and divorcee. Despite his mother's disapproval, they are married in an elaborate Palm Beach ceremony. Soon after, they leave for his new assignment in the Philippines. Restless, Louise will leave MacArthur after 6 years with the remark, Sir Galahad carried on his courtship as if he were reviewing a division of troops. In a career of successes, this will be MacArthur's first major failure. Recalled to the United States, MacArthur is given in 1927 a highly distasteful duty. He is appointed to the tribunal in the court-martial of a close friend, aviator Billy Mitchell. Publicly critical of the War Department's policies on air power, Mitchell is charged with insubordination. Although MacArthur's sympathies lie with him, Mitchell is found guilty and suspended from duty. 24 years later, MacArthur in turn will feel himself victimized by men he considers lacking in vision. By 1930, midway between the world wars, the United States Army is a shadow force. Poorly trained and equipped, it numbers barely 137,000 men. Morale is low, and even lower are the funds doled out by a Depression-era Congress. At this moment, MacArthur reaches the top. He is appointed Chief of Staff, a warrior without a war.
Mr. Secretary, I look forward with keen anticipation to my close association with you in the great cause of national defense.
MacArthur's only military action as Chief of Staff will be against a ragtag army of jobless war veterans who march on Washington in July 1932. Demanding a promised bonus for their wartime services, they set up a ramshackle squatters camp on the capital's outskirts and threaten to stay there until they are paid. In the sweltering summer, as Congress takes no action, their anger festers. Agitators call for violence against the government. Rioting breaks out. A veteran is killed. There are many injuries. Tensions mount beyond police control. On orders from President Hoover, the Army moves in to clear the veterans' camp. Under MacArthur's personal command, the operation is characteristically swift and efficient, with no serious casualties on either side. With a then obscure Major, Dwight Eisenhower, as his staff aide, MacArthur regards the action as an unfortunate but necessary civil skirmish. But the violence in Washington shocks a nation where increasing millions face the bleak uncertainties of the Depression years. They resent the image of an immaculate general, cool and untroubled, who might almost be presiding over a field exercise. Overnight, in many a mind, MacArthur becomes a callous Cossack, an impression he will never fully erase. His term as Chief of Staff completed, MacArthur sails for the Philippines in 1935 to act as a military advisor. En route, he meets Jean Faircloth, a Tennessee lady with an instinctive admiration for men in uniform. As his second bride, she will be the ideal Army wife, adaptable and unflaggingly cheerful. Through the hardships of coming years, MacArthur will call her my finest soldier. Their only child, Arthur, is born in 1938 in Manila. Here, despite rising world tensions, the MacArthurs live quietly in what they consider their permanent home. Heading a United States mission, including Major Eisenhower, MacArthur resigns to become a Philippine field marshal. Regular officers resent his grandiose title. Privately, they call him the Napoleon of Luzon. The Philippine Army, which his father once defeated, Douglas MacArthur now seeks to weld into a modern fighting force to meet the rising threat of Japanese attack, which MacArthur believes will come in the spring of 1942. But on a Sunday morning in December 1941, word of Pearl Harbor reaches an equally unprepared Manila. At noon, the Japanese strike. Caught on the ground at Clark Field, MacArthur's Air Force is virtually wiped out in the first attack. Soon, after scattered landings, the main Japanese invasion force of 80,000 men goes ashore at Lingayen Gulf and strikes southward against Manila. MacArthur cannot hope to stop them. Covered by stubborn delaying actions, MacArthur orders his troops to evacuate Manila with all possible stores of munitions and supplies. Within a week, he has skillfully maneuvered the bulk of his forces into the 30-mile-long Bataan Peninsula, a strong defense position. Off the tip of Bataan, Corregidor Island, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, commands entrance to Manila Bay. In these powerful bastions, MacArthur is confident he can keep a toehold in the Philippines until reinforcements arrive. Stopped by the Bataan defenses, the Japanese timetable of conquest is critically delayed. As Washington begins national mobilization, President Roosevelt faces the demands of global war. Though he promises aid to MacArthur, he is committed to Europe first. The Philippines must wait. But on Bataan, the weary garrison is heartened by MacArthur's assurances that massive reinforcements are on the way. Half-starved, they give ground slowly, sustained by hope and wild rumors of imminent aid. If a rumor is disproved, there is always tomorrow. But tomorrow brings only fresh attacks. Hong Kong, Wake Island, Singapore, gone. But under a storm of bombs, Bataan and Corregidor hold on. One flickering torch of Allied resistance in the far Pacific. Finally, in March, comes MacArthur's crushing realization that he has sustained his troops with a promise that cannot be fulfilled. Now he knows, in truth, that help will never come. On March 12, 1942, a small flotilla of PT boats escapes Corregidor by night. Under direct orders from President Roosevelt, General MacArthur is forced to leave his doomed Philippine command. After 10 days of travel, much of it across enemy seas and airspace, MacArthur reaches Melbourne, Australia, with his family and a few staff officers. Contrary to wide rumors, each member of the party has been permitted only one suitcase. The general is grim and depressed, but his arrival reassures Australians of United States support. Their frontline troops in North Africa, the Australians have been dismayed by Japan's southward rush. To the cheering crowds, MacArthur reports, "I came through," then makes his famous promise, "I shall return." He plans to organize an immediate offensive for the relief of Corregidor. But again, MacArthur has made a pledge he cannot honor. The rescue force he expects to lead does not exist. Stunned by the pitifully meager resources of men and materiel, MacArthur can only hope to begin a long, slow buildup. Beyond his help, Corregidor falls. From the ranks of its bitter defenders rise accusations that they have been betrayed and left to die by Dugout Doug, who has fled for his own safety. MacArthur, whose personal bravery has never been questioned even by his enemies, now must bear silently the galling insinuations of cowardice. In New Guinea, just north of the Australian mainland, another Bataan is in the making. Exhausted Australian militiamen are barely holding their own. With their defeat, Australia itself expects a massive Japanese invasion. But the defense of Australia, MacArthur decides, will be fought here in the jungles of New Guinea. The spearheads of the first Allied counteroffensive in the Pacific will be the weary militiamen themselves. As his strength increases, MacArthur launches a mounting offensive. Taking the Japanese by surprise, he makes bold use of paratroops and amphibian task forces. In January 1943, 10 months after he left Corregidor, MacArthur begins a series of leapfrog landings along the northern New Guinea coast. Following a strategy of hit 'em where they ain't, he bypasses Japanese strongholds. Their supply lines severed, concentrations of Japanese are left to wither by slow attrition of hunger and disease. Many enemy units surrender without a fight. MacArthur's sole military responsibility in the Southwest Pacific area is the defense of Australia. But as he sends his forces steadily westward along the coast of New Guinea, it becomes clear that he has larger goals in view. As if driven by some inner need to redeem his word, he is heading for the Philippines. Many a weary dogface is startled and impressed by the Supreme Commander's front zone appearances, but not all love him. Many troops resent the communiques which treat the Pacific Campaign as MacArthur's personal war, and the renowned publicity staff which guards camera angles, projecting a calculated image of an infallible leader. But even his critics admit the campaign is brilliant. Step by step, MacArthur is approaching the Philippines. In the United States, MacArthur's dramatic press communiques stir a public hungry for good news. His victories raise a wave of excited adoration. He is widely touted as a presidential candidate in the approaching 1944 campaign. But holding himself above the hoopla and hubbub, MacArthur denies any presidential ambition. In Australia, MacArthur's statements are given new weight by his surging popularity at home.
2 years ago, when I landed on your soil, I said to the people of the Philippines whence I came, I shall return. Tonight, I repeat those words. I shall return.
Mysteriously summoned to Pearl Harbor in July 1944, MacArthur is aware that his promise to return to the Philippines has been made entirely on his own authority. It has no basis in the strategy of his Pentagon superiors, whom he has come to regard as a vindictive clique determined to block him. On arrival in Pearl Harbor, MacArthur is stunned to discover that President Roosevelt has called a top-level conference to decide the entire strategy of the Pacific War. Unprepared for such a meeting, he fears he has been ambushed by his rivals. The Navy of Admiral Chester Nimitz largely dominates Pacific strategy. Despite the popular impression at home, MacArthur's theater of operations is considered of secondary importance by his superiors. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, all these lie in Nimitz's area of command. As the meeting gets underway, Nimitz proposes a Navy thrust across the Central Pacific, drawing on MacArthur's forces, but bypassing the Philippines. If Nimitz's grand design is adopted, MacArthur's operations will become a backyard war, and the general himself a mere bystander. In rebuttal, MacArthur insists that the Philippines must be taken, if only to sever Japan's vital supply lines. But eloquently, he pleads the overriding moral commitment to liberate the people of the Philippines. Not until the conference ends does the president reveal his decision. Douglas, he says, you win. October 20th, MacArthur again stands off the Philippine shore. First assault wave hits the beach at Leyte. It bears all of MacArthur's hopes and plans since Corregidor. It's gambling that Leyte is lightly held. The next days, even hours, will decide the outcome.
In this land that I have known so long, and amongst this people that I have loved so well. My dear friends, I have returned.
Three years after his departure, MacArthur returns to Corregidor. He has kept his word. But it is a strangely desolate triumph, for few of Corregidor's original defenders still live.
I see that the old flagstaff still stands. Have your troops hoist the colors to its peak, and let no enemy ever haul them down.
August 6th, 1945, the world of Douglas MacArthur and all other men changes forever. On September 2nd, in ceremonies aboard the battleship Missouri anchored in Tokyo Bay, Japan surrenders to the Allied powers, and it is MacArthur, the controversial underdog among Allied commanders, who is given the honor of presiding. For the United States, it has been a long road back from Pearl Harbor. For Douglas MacArthur, it has been a long road back from near obscurity. In 1945, at war's end, Japan lies in ruin. The nation has accepted unconditional surrender only at the verge of absolute collapse. When General Douglas MacArthur lands at Atsugi Airport near Yokohama, he is supreme commander for the victorious Allies and absolute ruler of Japan. Though expected to consult with an Allied council of advisors, he quickly dismisses the group as a useless debating society and a nuisance. MacArthur rules a nation in shock. Like sleepwalkers, the Japanese stare in blank uncertainty at their new masters. Shattered by defeat, they've been torn from every belief that has given them identity in the past. In Tokyo's Daiichi building, Douglas MacArthur is creating a new identity for Japan. As his occupation headquarters, this austere office building replaces the Imperial Palace as the nation's center of power. By MacArthur's directives, the people of Japan may now raise their eyes to see the emperor, not as a god, but as a man. The act is fundamental to MacArthur's reforms. Japan's first free election is held barely 8 months after surrender. Breaking 2,000 years of tradition, Japanese can engage in open debate. Political prisoners are freed. Women can vote. MacArthur also curbs monopolies, begins land reforms, encourages unions. His bold, progressive program alarms conservatives and confounds his liberal critics. To Tokyo comes a stream of distinguished visitors. Under MacArthur's benign rule, the defeated capital of Japan again becomes a center of first importance. The authoritarian father of Japanese freedom is a remote figure, rarely seen. In a curious way, Japan has lost one god and found another. On June 25, 1950, a North Korean army sweeps across the 38th parallel into South Korea. Swiftly, President Truman orders American troops to Korea. Supported by the UN, it is to be not a war, but a police action under the supreme command of General MacArthur. Again in battle, MacArthur seems 10 years younger to his aides. He calls the Korean conflict Mars' last gift to an old warrior. With the surprise landings at Incheon, behind enemy lines, MacArthur caps a brilliant campaign. Hardly 3 months after the Korean War began, victory is in sight. Again, MacArthur is summoned to a presidential conference, this time at Wake Island with Harry Truman, whom he has never met. But he has heard of Truman's quick temper. In private talks, however, the president merely urges restraint in foreign policy statements, and later awards MacArthur a Distinguished Service Medal. The threat of Chinese intervention is discussed, but discounted by MacArthur.
Hey, pow!
But the Chinese attack in massive strength at the end of November. United States and South Korean units are cut up and destroyed, or thrown into retreat over terrain just won in bloody battle. Robbed of victory, MacArthur must now make desperate plans just to keep a foothold in Korea. Abruptly, he and Washington face a new crisis and a new war. It also is a new kind of war, a gray war of awful stalemate. 2 million men on both sides will die simply to achieve the status quo. With its allies, Washington seeks to prevent widening the conflict into World War III. It is, says an official, the wrong war, the wrong place at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. But MacArthur publicly and incessantly calls for broader action against the Chinese communists. There is, he declares, no substitute for victory. Back home, a disturbed President Truman reassures alarmed allies that MacArthur is not dictating United States policy in Korea. As he tours Korean lines to bolster morale, MacArthur is waging another campaign on another front, for he has made the conduct of the war a public issue between himself and the president, his military and civil superior. In this conflict, a decision cannot be long delayed.
It is with the deepest personal regret that I found myself compelled to take this action. General MacArthur is one of our greatest military commanders. But the cause of world peace is much more important than any individual.
In disgrace, and yet in splendor, MacArthur comes home to a storm of ticker tape. National emotion runs high over a mythical hero few have ever seen. Says one awestruck congressman, "We saw a great hunk of God in the flesh, and we heard the voice of God."
When I joined the Army, even before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plain at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished. But I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barrack ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
Now self-dismissed from national affairs, MacArthur does fade away. He makes a half-hearted sortie into politics, accepts a prestige corporate post. Only in his memoirs do old conflicts flare, and, as if submitting his case to history, he quotes at length the praise and accolades of famous men. Yet in the remoteness of age, freed from the constraints of command, he is a warmer and more accessible figure than ever before. In March 1964, a now fragile, vulnerable old man of 84 enters Walter Reed Hospital. A month later, on April 5th, the flag above West Point's quad and plane stands at half-mast for General of the Armies, Douglas MacArthur. Here at the point, in his farewell speech, General MacArthur had delivered his own epitaph.
In my dreams, I hear again the crash of guns, the rattle of musketry, the strange, mournful mutter of the battlefield. But in the evening of my memory, always I come back to West Point. Always there echoes and re-echoes duty, honor, country. Today marks my final roll call with you. But I want you to know that when I cross the river, my last conscious thoughts will be of the Corps and the Corps and the Corps.
I hope you've enjoyed this presentation of the General. Thanks for joining us.